Let's begin. Welcome to the Tech Talk 360, sponsored by AirPro Diagnostics. I'd like to thank Lonnie Margot, Michael Quinn, and Team AirPro for making Tech Talk 360 possible. Our mission is to provide a learning environment around emerging technologies that will enhance consumer safety, workplace professionalism, and provide value to all industry segments. Tech Talk 360 will present the hot topics of the industry and the issues you need to be aware of. Our goal is to present topics that you would not normally see in other webinars. The webinars are presented every other month. The next webinar will be held November 15th. I'd now like to turn things over to our two great hosts, Jordan Hendler and George Avery.
Hey, hi, Fred. Where's my other host?
Thanks, Fred. I'm here.
Oh man, talk about scare me.
Oh no.
You're the best part of this host duo. So
back at
Fred.
you, George.
Well, thanks, Fred, for this is a good one. And I tell you, if you're looking to talk about new stuff, this is a good one. And my goal today is to learn how to spell sustainability. So I'm going to get there before it's over. Jordan, you doing good?
Doing good. I really appreciate the opportunity as well, and I think we'll just go ahead and get started. George, do you want to introduce yourself, give yourself a little bit of background, and I'll do the same.
I don't mind you going first, but I'll take it. George Avery, for those of you that don't know, I've been in the industry for quite a while, past chair of the CIC, and also the National Auto Body Council, still very active in the industry. And I've been out and about speaking at some conferences, and I'll tell you what, this sustainability is something that we need to talk about, and I think this is one of the first podcasts or groups that we're kind of attacking it, and we've got a great speaker today. So, Jordan.
Yeah, and I'll just a little bit of background for anybody who doesn't know me. I'm Jordan Hendler. I own Admin Concepts, which is an administrative company for several trade associations. I am also the conference manager for Collision Industry Conference. This is, fun fact, my 25th year in the industry, which is, I started when I was 5. So I'm really excited about this today because, sustainability and all of the facets that it means is something that I find fascinating in the ways of what's real and what's not real. And then what does that mean to shops? So my goal today is to ask the questions from the shop perspective of how does this affect a shop from a day-to-day perspective, as well as what are initiatives that they can take on that put them at the leading edge of this. So I love how shops can use this as an opportunity to get in front of things that may later be something they wouldn't have to catch up on. So I'm really excited also for today's topic. And I think up next, George, we will have, I'm going to do a little housekeeping first.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, I'll tell you what, you want to get the antitrust out of the way real quick? I can do that.
Yep.
So this has to be read out loud for a lot of you that are on the call. So as participants of this webinar, we need to be mindful of the constraints of antitrust laws. There shall be no discussion or agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. This prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual pricing, rates, coverages, market practices, claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. So each participant is obligated to speak up immediately for the purpose of preventing us going to jail. I don't think that's in there, but I put it right at the end. So we need to make sure. Jordan and I will monitor that, and so will Fred. But again, you can raise your hand if you see anything that's out of bounds. So with that, we're clear sailing. Well, next is questions too. We're going to take some questions over Q&A. All right. So first of all, we do have some questions that have been submitted in advance, so we'll go through that. We won't take any live questions today, and we'd like you to use the Q&A feature. And one reason we don't take live is it's just not efficient, and from a sustainability standpoint, because it takes a minute to get connected and so on. So as you have an opportunity to type your question in, it'll come into Jordan and I. And as Jordan said, she'll take care of the auto body repair side. I'll kind of look out for the insurance side, or at least to give that perspective. and we'll be good to go. So anything I need to add? Anything else you want to add, Jordan?
Yeah, so I'll actually add, I know most are familiar with the Q&A feature or Zoom. If you've been anywhere post-COVID, you have spent a lot of time in one of these platforms. So there is a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will get to the questions as we can. No guarantees on every single question being addressed, especially if we can bucket a few of the questions together. Our hope, though, is to address any questions or as many questions as we can so that participants have the most interactive experience possible today. So the questions come to us, we'll find that right place. It might be immediately, Gabriel, that's the heads up to you. We might say, hey, Gabriel, we got this question. It's really related to exactly what you just said. So we might interrupt or we might hold it to the end. But either way, we're going to do our best to address as many as we possibly can in the time that we have allowed today. So I think that that's where we are with housekeeping. George, do you want to add any additional comments before we get started?
Well, no, I'm good with one exception. Sometimes, as Jordan says, we'll get to the top of the hour and we run out of time. And you're always welcome to reach out to Jordan or myself. We'll have our contact information at the end. And we can at least get you pointed in the right direction if you didn't get to answer a question. So I just want to throw that out there. Otherwise, got a great guest today.
Yeah, we are all happy resources here. So I will take a turn at introducing our guest today, which is Gabriel Morley. He is the Associate Vice President for DECRA North America. And we, again, Gabriel, really appreciate you taking the time to do this webinar with us and all of the preparation that it took to get here, including the life you've lived up to this point, gives you all the experience that you're drawing from. We understand. So Gabriel is currently the leading the development of sustainability and ESG offerings in the automotive, fleet, and heavy equipment industries, while focusing on future innovation and global trends at DECRA North America. He brings extensive experience in the automotive and technology industries, having launched several new operational tools and offerings for both franchise and independent operations. Most recognizably, though, he was the key architect in the development and success of the certified collision, service retention, and digital retail initiatives while at BMW of North America. So with that introduction, Gabriel, I know that that's just the tip of the iceberg with you. So I'll let you talk about what we're going to be going through today, and we'll let you take the wheel and head on from there. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, welcome, Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Especially thank you for jumping on the sustainability trend early, because I think, George, you mentioned in your intro, there's quite a bit of news and conversation about it, but really taking a good deep dive look at it, it's just starting to turn right now. So this is exciting to be, this early on with this kind of group. So thank you guys. So I guess maybe before we start about sustainability, Jordan, George, Fred, what have you heard? What's your understanding of the topic? Maybe how have you heard it come up in conversation? And let's start maybe there.
Who's going to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
So everything from what we hear as a consumer, right? So I've been a recycler since I was a kid. I grew up on the West Coast. It was kind of a thing in our house to recycle everything as much as possible. And so I brought that with me to the East Coast when I came out here. But I think that there is what the consumers hear about what sustainability means is completely different, in the vehicle context than what we would deal with as a collision repair industry. So for me, what I want to hear is how shops can address current processes and how could it affect their day-to-day as it already stands. And then, like I said, what can they get in front of? What are opportunities available to them to, hey, save money? If sustainability is about efficiency, in my opinion. I hope to learn more about that from you, Gabriel. So, I want to know what efficiency and environmental friendliness and what our customers are looking for when they select a shop. That's what I'm listening for today.
Cool. Very good. Gabriel, from my chair, at least from the insurance side, my guess is anytime something like this comes up, what now? It's like my plate's full and now there's something else. I think on the insurance side, sustainability has kind of been in their DNA for a while. over time. I think primarily it happened, Gabriel, because a lot of insurance companies have centralized. And as they centralize and you start handling claims, from one state in another state and so on, is you've got to have some consistency. And I'm not saying that's all sustainability, but I'm just saying that that's kind of in their brain right now. And I think that as RFPs are put out and so on, there's always questions in there about sustainability. So for the insurer, I don't know if it's that new. And I think having this in front of them is excellent because I had a chance to see some of this before and I'm impressed. And I think it's going to be great. The only downside, Gabriel, is from an insurance perspective, I got to say this, and I feel a lot of love out there. But when something new comes along, for the insurer, it's a pretty wide swath. And what I'm talking about is all the way through feather, prime, and block, and anything you can think of where the changes, ADAS, of course, just recently, the reaction from the repair industry is so broad as to prices charged and labor and all those different things. It's very hard for an insurer to get their arms around what they owe as a response, under their contract. So I think this is really good, and I'll just kind of carry the insurance flag for a little bit. But if any insurers are on the call, this is good information that'll help you interact. And then, of course, the other advantage is come to CIC. That's where a lot of it's going to be talked about. I think you can get some questions answered. So long response, but I wanted to get those 2 points out. Thanks.
Great CIC plug, George. Hey, be where the leading edge is talked about. That's it.
Yeah, and I honestly, being a member of CIC and also participating on the committees too, like there are a lot of these sustainability topics sprinkled in under different titles and categories, but when you bring it all together, this gets talked quite a bit about at CIC. So absolutely.
Yeah. And from my perspective, we have, I'm interested in the smart machines and and things of that nature. So this and the sustainability is, the newer equipment is more efficient, and I'll just use my my recent purchase. I bought a new heater and air conditioner, and it's got all these smart stuff with it. But it also, the bottom line is, it saved me 60% on my electric bill over this summer, and that's just it's like I would not have believed it had it not have happened to me. So
yeah.
these new machines are unbelievably efficient.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
all right, well, let's get started in it. So Jordan, if we could just move on. So the goal here today is really, we hear a lot about the transition to EV. We hear a lot about the different industry trends, energy, shop demands, new players in the field. So, but a lot of that start to drive this conversation around sustainability. And like everyone just talked about, sustainability is such a broad topic, and it really depends on where you are in the automotive industry, what the implications or what that means for your day-to-day business. So the goal here is that, I just want to share with everybody high level overview. What is sustainability? How is it being talked about in the auto industry? And then I think, Jordan, really to your focus, while sustainability is such a very high topic, I want to talk about the things a shop can do or a repair facility can do in their day-to-day as this topic of sustainability starts to develop and evolve, because it is very early in the stages. So this could go a lot of different ways, but there are things we can do today that will help us with sustainability, also helps us run our operations productively. So that being said, one of the main goals for DEKRA is focusing on safety and reliability. It's DEKRA is one of the largest we call it a TIC company, so we do testing, inspection, and certification, which is why this falls really in our wheelhouse here to talk about. So if you're not really familiar with DEKRA, maybe we can move on to the next slide, Jordan. If you're not really familiar with DEKRA is a global company. Go back one. Global company. We're in over 60 different countries, plenty of different services. As I mentioned, the main wheelhouse, testing, inspection, certification. We work with anyone from the OEMs when they build a car, when they put a car out into the marketplace. We do a lot of testing with part suppliers. We administer different type of programs, requirements for them. We also work with large organizations, MSOs, again, part suppliers, OEMs, anyone involved in the supply chain. So some of the things that we do, we also help them look at things like ISO certification, safety certification. And as we're having a lot of these conversations, there's been a lot of asks about sustainability. So we ourselves have kind of educated ourselves on in what context. George, you said insurance companies, right? When an insurance company partner comes to us and says, hey, how are we doing on sustainability? That means something completely different than an OEM who's building a car and trying to source ethical parts, or, you know, parts that are something they can always get a hold of, rely on, that go through quality control manufacturing. So it's very different for everybody. And I think that's why it's kind of come to the DECRA plate to really focus on, being that independent third-party global company. But as big of a topic as it is, you know, I want to really condense this down to what is sustainability in our day-to-day life. So if we can go to next, when we talk sustainability, implementing sustainability practices, it's really just getting down to good business, right? So think about sustainability as a topic, as the umbrella. And under the umbrella, you'll have E, S, and G. So that's the other term that sometimes gets changed, used interchangeably. But sustainability is kind of the umbrella. E, S, and G are the components that go under that. So Fred, you mentioned in your example, you had just bought, a new AC unit, and you save 60% on your utility cost. Well, that's a great thing for the environment, but it's also a great thing for your bottom line, right? So that's kind of how I want to address this conversation. Any questions is under those three buckets, there's a lot of different things. While they make sense in a large picture, when you bring it down to a shop level, there's really practical solutions here. And I think those that are staying into the cutting edge, you're probably already doing this, and it's just enhancing and keeping that, innovation going. So focusing on the environmental side, when you hear about environmental, you're going to hear a lot about carbon neutrality, carbon zero. A lot of states in the US have already put mandates in. They're trying to get to carbon zero by 2030, 2050. Some states are a little stricter, trying to get rid of ICE vehicles or move away from ICE vehicles a lot sooner. But the reason why is from a high level. We're talking global emissions, 75% coming from tailpipe emissions. That makes about 15% of the global CO2 emissions. And this has led industries to spend, on addressing it. So when you talk about the spend, $3.4 trillion are going into all this low emission vehicle technology, right? So that's why you see the progressiveness of EV technology so rapidly right now. There's $3.4 trillion going into this innovation. You also see the emergence of hydrogen vehicles start to come back. Hydrogen vehicles aren't anything new. BMW used to do it way back in the 80s and 90s. Honda's been doing it in California for a long time and developing that. But as far as a mass market product, I don't think the scale has just been there yet. But that's also why we're spending $100 billion a year on infrastructure, right? Charging stations, hydrogen stations, all of that. So I think when you talk about it from a global perspective, manufacturing cars, large organizations, they're shipping barges of vehicles over the ocean. These things like carbon neutrality make a lot of sense for them. But if I were to ask a shop owner, what's your carbon footprint look like? Very few could tell me, right? Very few could probably tell me what their electricity bill was offhand, for last month, unless they're really paying attention to it. And if you start asking about things like environmental or the waste that's going through their shop, it's not something we talk a lot about on a day-to-day basis. So why it's important, things like your partnerships, things like the materials you use. We saw this in the last decade or so with waterborne paint, right? Think about everyone who's gone through that conversion of waterborne paint. What was the driver? What did that mean for your operation? So those things are kind of now coming back into the picture, just at a larger scale, where it's not just your paint booth that someone's looking at or looking to improve. it's really the whole business at this point. So Fred, you brought up a great example about the AC unit. From a shop perspective, when you think about your energy, your waste utilization at the shop, think about it more in perspective of, are you keeping up on your equipment? You know, the example of a more efficient AC unit is something I can compare to the example of a more efficient welder, a smart welder, or you know, AC unit in the shop, much larger unit, much bigger impact. Your boiler, you have things like filters and all those, you know, regular maintenance, routine maintenance that you have to stay up on. The more you stay up on those kind of things, the better it is going to be for your bottom line. It's going to run more optimal. It's not going to drain utility. We all know what utility costs have been over this last year or a couple of years. It's not looking like it's getting any better. And also running a shop has become a little bit more difficult, supply chain issues, shortages, profitability. So you have to really look at these things that take away the cost and how you can manage the overheads a little bit better. Now, I will say, if you talk to somebody about ESG, you're going to also hear kind of the standard stuff of convert your lights to LED bulbs, you know, put solar panels on your roof. You know, some may go as far as say, hey, if you paint your roof white, it reflects the sun and keeps temperatures a little bit more in check. Those things are great if you can do them. A lot of shops don't own their buildings, don't own that. They have a landlord or a lease to kind of go through. It's a little bit more difficult. Those are also great things for long-term investment, right? If you change your light bulbs out, I don't think you're going to see such an impact to your bottom line next month, but over the course of time, right? So you have to kind of look at this also as what's going to help me today, a little bit in a few years, and down the road long-term as we kind of go through these things. So yes, those things are suggestions. I think you're definitely going to get more bang out of your buck by staying on top of your maintenance schedules and making sure you're continuously evaluating and reinvesting in that equipment that you use, because the technology is improving, right? And the more the technology improves, the less the overheads are. And that's not just from a utility perspective. You're going to be able to work on production as well a lot more efficiently. I mentioned under sustainability, environmental is one component. I don't know, guys, any questions, any thoughts? What are you guys seeing there?
So I'll take the first question. So I know that, like you just mentioned, there are massive hurdles for collision repairs right now that feel like fires compared to this, which would be, like you said, supply chain issues and, you know, recruitment, having tech shortages, really undermining a lot of the successes or possible successes that businesses have. And I know you're gonna get to that. But I think when you're talking about like carbon zero and things like that, how that has to do with their efficiencies is that, you know, I know we'll talk about practicality towards the end of the hour, but, you know, when you're saying, hey, these are some opportunities, what about waste? What about recycling? Like I talked about, you know, I'm a recycler at heart. So that's always my first question is, you know, what is their recycling? Like, how can they at least deal with what they are producing as waste now?
Yeah, so yeah, and that's a great point. You know, recycling is a big one. Try not to be as wasteful up front. So, you know, I think when we were talking, we were using example like the sandpaper on the shop floor. You know, consumables, you run through consumables so much. There's materials left in tubes, there's sandpaper on the floor, there's half-used tape rolls. You know, all of that requires you to continually buy, and all that stuff ends up in landfills. So, you know, when you look at a practical shop application, providing receptacles and you know, educating your team on, hey, if you're having a soda, put the soda in the recyclable bin. That's one thing. There's also a lot of companies that will come by. I mean, we're all familiar with that from a bumper headlight core perspective, but there's also a lot of companies that come by and recycle, you know, the day-to-day trash and recycle items. So when they can separate that, yes, that's being a good steward of the community. But it also helps you kind of keep track of those consumable items. So again, I think we've all heard from a shop perspective how much consumables cost, but then we still allow it to go on. And so that's constantly a challenge of a mindset thing. I've worked with a shop in the Midwest here, and Jordan, she was very similar to you, where her story was she was always raised in a house that recycled. So when she got control of a shop operation from her father, she made sure that the team recycled, right? Because that was passionate for her, right? That was something she was really passionate about. She lived by it at home, and being at the shop made no difference to her. So she really kind of taught her team how to separate those things out, and just again, just be mindful of it all. So I think that kind of starts with a little bit of personal responsibility or personal drive, but in the long run, when you see the waste that you produce and then think about how much you have to reorder or spend on ordering consumables, it does play a factor. The other aspect I would say is the water issue around environmental. So we talked about waterborne paint. I don't know if anyone's attended a CIC lately in the last year or so, or had an opportunity to hear from Dirk around EV and all that. One of the things we talk about is a thermal event. What happens? How to protect yourself from that? And putting out an ICE vehicle thermal event, I think Dirk says it's like about 4,000 gallons of water. When you're talking about an EV, that could be 40,000 gallons of water and 3 to 5 times. So these are things that the EPA, the government agencies, have kind of taken note. Is your shop prepared to handle a situation like that? And then if it does happen, don't be surprised in the future if the EPA kind of comes by and says like 400,000 gallons of water that all just went to the ground. What's that looking like, right? And they do some contamination tests and things like that. So that's also where keeping a clean shop is going to become important, right? If you have things on the floor, you're putting out a thermal event and they're using that much water, you don't want oil and things on the floor that are going to run off out the door and start seeping into the soil. So there's a lot of effort right now on the agency side about how do we handle these things when they do happen, and what's the follow-up look like. So unfortunately, I think once something does happen like that, you're going to get all the attention, right? And we don't want to be the shop that gets all the attention the first time, because they're really going to be looking at the impact and what do we do about it in the future. So
can I ask one additional?
Yeah.
So really practically, and George is going to dive all over this as the insurer mindset today. So here's a really practical. I work with a couple of shops really closely who have several hundred EV vehicles in process at any given moment. Think about a 95-degree day. Those batteries are utilizing energy or their own battery to keep themselves cool, right? And so they've had to come up with these literal rotation schedules. And some of the shops have even put in metered charging stations at their facilities. So there's a forward step for anybody listening, right? And they actually have a printed out receipt for every time that vehicle has been on a charger that they can then charge back to the repair order. So they are if they're smart, and I want to think that everybody here wants to be smart, that they are tracking their actual electric costs and recuperating it. It also doesn't stop the fact that they're using way more energy. So they can't just park a vehicle out in the parking lot that's an EV and hope that everything's going to be okay and it's going to maintain its charge the entirety of the repair process, especially when parts can be 3 to 6 months, or, candidly, carrier disagreements, that car could sit. We've had cars sit for 12 months even. So that is one factor that I think it takes careful consideration. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I'm sure George will dive on the whole, here's what's coming down the road for the insurers.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, certain states this last year alone had alternate charging days. So think about, like, I'm in the East Coast, New York, New Jersey area. We have alternate parking days, right? On Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, you can park on one side, and the other days you park on the other. They had that with charging, though. If you want to charge your home EV, the even side of the street house numbers could charge one day, and then the odds could charge the other, because a lot of areas are trying to manage the draw on the power grid. So it's challenging, Jordan. I mean, you think about a shop who's got that much, the volume you're talking about,
certified, like if you're certified, you don't have to be certified Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, etc. You could literally be your former employer, BMW, you could be Mercedes, you could be Honda, Toyota, whatever. And there are all electric vehicles of every make now. And that really, and soon it could be every vehicle on our lot, to your point. So that is something that I've seen come up recently as like, oh, hey, this is a huge hurdle we could be facing very soon.
Yeah. Then the challenge I see too with new shops, shops looking for putting in charging stations, even if it's one or two to help out at the time being, they'll go and hire an electrical engineer company. They'll do all the testing, they'll do the analysis and say, okay, you can have, reliably 4 chargers on your property. And then they'll go to maybe look at a permit, and some of the zoning restrictions, the permits will say, again, we're trying to play catch up a little bit, but they'll say, hey, you need to put in 10 or 12. But when you look at, hey, what the requirement is for the permit and the zoning, you want 10 or 12, but the actual property can only handle 4 or 5. You got a discrepancy there. And shops, that's a big thing for shops, because you need to expand, but now you're taking on additional costs where you may not. I mean, Jordan, you mentioned metered charging stations. You may not be able to meter that out and recoup some of that, because you'll have them installed, but they just won't run.
Or we'll come up with these generic charges that George is talking about in the wide swath, where people go, oh, well, it was on there for X number of minutes, so I'm just going to charge this.
Yeah, and they, you know where this starts, and with anything new, it's this whole thing of what is part of doing business. The insurers have always been down that road about, wait a minute, you got to do this. I guess that's a part of doing business. Whereas on the repair facility side, and I don't blame them, they're like going, which code do I use for the line item to get paid for this? And that's the part that's going to be a little bit bumpy. And then of course you talk about recycling, and I'd like your perspective on this, especially with your OEM background, is that here there's all this focus on recycling, yet the procedure for OEs is no recycled parts. So the recycled parts are, I'm starting to sound bitter. Did you notice that? The OE, I mean, recycled parts are OE parts. And now I understand we don't know, may not know where they came from, and so on and so forth. But I guess, and Gabriel, I'm just going to give you these two to comment. One is just some comments on the fact of, and I know there's some things underway for maybe a certified recycled part. I don't know, but comment on that. And the other one I just popped in my head when I saw the map of what your company does. I spoke at IBIS a couple times, and I remember seeing an overview from all the countries. And I remember sitting in the audience, listening to one country and go, oh my gosh, they are so far behind and we're so ahead. And then the next country gets up there and I went, oh my gosh, the United States is way behind from what they're doing. So what you see out there, I was just curious. You've got, because I hear people go, one country, they don't even care, just who cares? And then another country, some countries are almost all electric now. I just, from your perspective, from that broad view you have, I just a comment or two for the insurance folks on recycled parts for the OEs, as well as how are we doing compared to other countries? That's a question.
Yeah, so let's start with the parts. The parts are a big one. It's coming up. I've had the opportunity to talk to a few carriers and get their perspective as well in this, right? Because they're part of the supply chain, right? And I think you're going to see a tendency to maybe repair versus replace, right? I think that's right. That's a green initiative where you can say, we tried to repair something instead of throwing it away or introducing a new part into the ecosystem. So I think insurers will probably start to look at the feasibility of repairs a little bit more. George, you said, recycled parts are looking a lot better when you put it under a greener perspective. You do still have that. I would say there's still kind of that conflict, right? Of yes, it is, but you also have to look at the OEM perspective of repair, right? And why they also have those position statements and everything else. In my old former role with an OE, I would say there's a strict chain of command in handling. So the integrity of that piece when it does go on a vehicle. We know everybody who touched it, what channels it went through. We know that they were ISO certified, compliant with all of our procedures. there's a strict chain of command for when there's the liability case. I think today that's still something that a recycled part will kind of maybe face some conversation around, is how do you know? And there's testing around there. But how do I know it's a greener situation if the dismantler is in Texas and the part had to come from Maine and then it gets shipped and warehoused in Illinois, right? There's a lot of transportation, repackaging, things that go on. So it's not just as easy as saying a recycled part is a greener part, right? There's a lot of, again, we're going back to supply chain transparency that still has to come about into these conversations. And I think the biggest point of conversation down the road is going to really be, the material integrity. How do I know the car wasn't sitting out for 5 years and has had some sort of compromise to the integrity of that material? How do I know the packaging or the rebuilding, whoever does that piece did it to that standard using the, quality parts and everything else that align? So I think that's still, and George, if you recall, that's actually how yours and my relationship in the industry with State Farm and BMW.
That's right.
A remanufactured part was actually what drove us to connect and have that. And we're still talking about it, like 15 years later. But I think that's we're going to get to that conversation again. How do you know?
And I appreciate that. The only other thing I'll throw out there, just for my recycling friends, there's some pretty sophisticated and sharp recyclers out there. And if you want to know about a part, there's a lot that know about that part. So I don't want to underestimate those in the business of recycling. They're doing a lot too. But I appreciate you taking the time to answer it. Thanks.
No, they are doing a lot, and I see OEMs engaging more with them and learning how to partner with them. And again, I think that's the evolution we're seeing, is now OEMs are talking to them, and you do see more remanufactured offerings. You do see maybe a tier 2 part lineup that goes through, again, an authorized channel, just to give a little bit more credibility and material integrity. George, your other question was about where do we stack up globally. I think in Europe, they've tend to face this issue about sustainability with a little bit more regulations than we've had in the US. I mean, even go back to like data privacy, right? The other component of ESG we'll talk about. That's been going on for decades. And, we've introduced it a while ago. Other countries are now starting to introduce it a little bit more. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it. In some parts of the world, the regulations are driving the advancement so much quicker. If you look at like the Nordics, they canceled the ICE cars years ago and said, hey, everything going, in 2 years, we're going to go EV. And they converted, I think in the first year, it was 40% of the vehicles on the road being sold were EV. But that came from a very, very strict regulation. I think other parts, like where we are right now, we're having conversations. We're also still able to innovate a little bit, right? We're not getting rid of ICE, and you hear things about different types of fuel, right? Maybe ICE isn't going to go completely away. Maybe there's going to be synthetic gasoline or something else, an alternative. So I think you have to balance out, hey, yes, it's easier to make advancements with regulation, but you also stifle innovation a little bit when you go too fast.
All right. That's a good answer. That's a good perspective. I like that. Thank you.
Cool.
I'm just going to make a time note that you have a lot more to go.
Yeah.
And I really want to get to some of the points towards the end of your slides. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a nudge.
Yeah. So when we talk, especially being tech-oriented innovation, I think in the environmental side, there's a lot that can be done high level as well as operational. I did mention sustainability as an umbrella. So let's move on to maybe the S component under sustainability, ESG. So this is really where you see a lot of community impact. What is your community impact? Right now, there's over 3,000 skilled trade vacancies in the industry across the board, right? We know when you're trying to attract talent, retention, development, there's a lot of conversations about how do we engage younger people, different demographics, right? And there's tons of companies out there that really just focus on recruiting. But what we do know from all the sustainability studies, when you do have a diverse and engaged and developed career path for somebody, you're likely to outperform your profitability objectives by 21%, right? That's really what it comes down. The more diverse and skills and everything else, and in giving people a pathway where they're committed to you, you're 21% more likely to hit profitability. The other side of that is, if we're not keeping our people, if we're not developing, if we're not finding those new skills and sources of workforce, an average 3-month vacancy can cost a shop between $100,000 and $160,000, for 3 months. So extrapolate that out by 4, you're almost looking at $1 million, a year of not being able to hire. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We're finding shortages, and if we don't fill the shortage, it's affecting our business, which then affects our ability to attract talent into this industry. So that's really what that societal component is about, is how do you engage the community? How do you engage a different part of the community? And we see things, I'll say in California, I worked with a lot of the Asian community. And one of the things we did was we advertised, had a dealer out there who did a great job, advertised in the Asian newspapers. So, it was just an avenue they never thought of, they never connected with. The reason why I think the community piece is important, when you look at any OEM, I'll use Toyota as an example. Toyota has a sustainability report as a global company. They get funding, they get investments, they get, investments for R&D based on sustainability report and actions and activity. And part of that is also making sure your partners, whether it's an MSO, a supplier, a certified network, also aligns to those goals. So if you're going to work with that company, you have to make sure that if they have community goals, you're contributing to them globally as well. And Toyota came out, they have a 45-page report on just their community involvement. So, this is a big thing. If you want to, you look at a DRP, you look at an OEM program, they're going to ask you about, what are you doing in your community? How are you engaged? Because they're also looking at them as an organization. How are they being engaging? How are they supporting communities? So that's why this S component is so, I would say, broad, right? It's also about retaining workforce, but it's also your engagement in how you can support where you're doing business. Everyone wants to look as a good, responsible business partner in their area, and that's big.
I will add on top of that. So some of the things that we talk about all the time in the tech shortage is, what's your value proposition? I know that that's straight to what you're talking about. How do we make not just our industry, but our individual businesses attractive to people, whether that's benefits, or I know you have a female component that you could even speak to. But I do think also, a community involvement strategy, and George is very familiar with this from the work from the National Auto Body Council, is, hosting events that help emergency responders deal with these technology advancements. I mean, I work with the Washington Metropolitan Auto Body Association. We did a multi-year, multi-event campaign held at shops who invited all their local emergency responders, from police to fire to EMTs, to learn, when you approach a vehicle, where considerations need to be made. And this EV movement is the most important I've ever seen. So that was a twofold comment, but I think that both of those aspects, if you can elaborate a little bit more on maybe some opportunities for workforce retention or attractiveness, and then I don't know if you want to expand any more on the community involvement, but that was just a good idea, and it highlights the shop really well too. So they can do it selfish and selfishly at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan, you bring up a good point, right? Women, right? And you have the women in network industry is great. I think, a recent study from one of the automotive associations said, the one thing that women look for in joining the automotive skills trade is a network of other women that they can go to and confide in and rely on for support. So that support network is very important when you bring in any diverse group, or any group that's not typically who we normally see in our trade. And I think when you look at that, because it's diverse, everybody has different needs. So bringing those people in you're going to have to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more open-minded, whether that be a little bit more working, with a flexible schedule. Maybe there's childcare or family time or family care you have to work around, or maybe it's someone who is on the other end of their career. They still want to be active, but not 6-7 days a week, not 10 hours a day, and finding a different role where you can still use those skills, but in a new context might be a little bit more important down the road. So one of the things, my wife's in the auto industry. She has been for over 10 years. I have friends that are females that paint. A big challenge they had, is the paint suits, right? Great attention to detail, great eye, great painters, but then they're, sewing their own paint suits. And now you're starting to see more of it. Now you're starting to see women's size paint suits and other, materials and things like that. But think about somebody coming in and that's what they're faced with, right? So this is where, once we think about getting somebody and retaining them or going after a different type of person or skill set, what do we do? You mentioned the value prop. Like, what do we do to keep them? Are we prepared to facilitate a good workplace for them where they want to stay and grow? Because, let's face it, if you bring in a female as the example, you bring her a female painter in, and that's their first experience, and that's your first experience with that. If it's not a good one, she's going to go tell that network that, hey, not really catering or not really focused on bringing, it's not good for a woman. Let's go do something else, right? Let's find somebody else. And that's not good either. So it's, again, staying open-minded, and it could be, trade organizations that teach skills, people who want to switch careers, great place to get involved. But again, switching, you're going to have to do a little bit background. You're going to have to train them up, give them a path, and invest a little in their development. But I think it does pay off. I think the studies have shown it does pay off.
Yeah, I'll plug my gender just for a moment to say, like, I went to welding school before I was in the collision industry. So I'll echo the whole clothing issues. Getting certified in upside down welding when you're wearing the wrong outfit really does tend to wear on you. But I will say, like, I was always told, even in the welding, women have such a greater attention to detail just by hey, this is how we're wired, right? That we make excellent painters, we make excellent estimators. Like, don't ever discount that as, like, not just an option, but like a greater option potentially.
Yeah.
So I would echo that, and to say, making those adjustments, it shouldn't be a negative thing. It should be like, hey, we want to be the most attractive. And a lot of people, just let's face it, they don't pay attention to cleanliness. And men are just as keen to a clean environment as women. Everybody wants to work somewhere where they're proud that if they were to bring their family in, their family doesn't go, oh, you're working in this? Like, it's dingy, it's dark. Like, this is an effort to upscale under your umbrella.
Well, especially when you bring in high school students, trade school students, their parents come with them, that's also where you don't want that negative pressure from a parent to interfere with maybe a person's career choice later on. So I liken it, Jordan, when we get a piece of furniture and I got to put it together, I'm the one that rips the box open and grabs the tools, and my wife's the one that looks for the instructions in the trash. She's much better suited for repair planning and estimatic work than I. Don't have the patience to necessarily research all that line by line, but she does. I want to get in with my hands. So it's a different skill set, different use, right?
Sure. But, I love it.
So the other piece, we talked ESG, is the governance side. So governance, we've heard a lot about data privacy, data security. I will say, in this context of sustainability, it's not just data privacy. So I don't want to necessarily beat that conversation. Yes, it's very important. Organizations, CIC, SICA, trade organizations can really help you get into the details of data privacy. But when you're talking about sustainability and you're maybe a DRP or an OEM is coming to you and asking you about governance in your org, they're really looking to make sure that what you present on paper and policy and goals is the story you're living, right? So they want to make sure your actions are following the regulations and the mission statements and the policies you put in place. So if you say, you care about the environment, you're recycling, then make sure that you're recycling, right? Because that's a governance thing, that's an insurance thing. So they want to be assured their partners are following compliance regulations and asks, 100% of the time. So again, you say you're going to do something, make sure you're doing it. You're going to put a policy in place, and follow it. And this also goes, right? This is where you're going to see your smoking policies, your anti-harassment policies, your legal age, of working policies, and your data policies and things like that. So I know we talked about quite a bit. It's a big umbrella. As you see, we can talk about a lot of different aspects and go down a lot of different deep rabbit holes based on just a few things here. But I did want to leave the group with at least some tangible, whether you're focused on the environment, your societal, your governance component. When you're looking at environment, the best thing you can do, take a look at your equipment. Make sure you're maintaining it. If you need to invest in it, because it will not only help you with your production, it will help you with your overheads as well. Look at your waste. We talked about providing waste receptacles, or talking to maybe a recycler in your area who can come by, and take some of that from you. But look at your waste. How much energy are you using? I use the quick up doors or LED lights. Like, those are opportunities. Now you have to evaluate, does it make sense for your business? What's the expense? But at least look at it, right? Benchmark it. This is a big topic. Global organizations come to Decker and ask for help. We're available to anybody. There's all sorts of organizations. Jordan mentioned the work she's doing on the recruiting side with the organizations. Ask for help. You don't have to figure this out alone. I don't think anyone can figure this out alone, honestly. I've been so fortunate to talk to so many different organizations across the automotive industry about what are you doing, how are you looking at it. Just ask for help. Get involved in your community, evaluate your employee proposition. If you do get somebody in there, why do they want to work for you and maybe not the shop down the street? Or why do they want to work for you and maybe not Google? But, we look at it from a sales, right? Everybody knows a sales pitch, elevator pitch. What is your elevator pitch for why somebody wants to work for you? And be creative, open-minded. And lastly, with the governance piece, at the very least, compare your policies. If you have a policy to protect and inform, are you protecting data? Are you informing them? Look at your agreements. Big top topic right now in the industry, especially here in the US. Look at your agreements. What are you responsible for? What are your part, especially if you sublet? If you sublet, do you know what their obligations are to yours? And the last one is train your staff, right? That's an easy one. There's a lot of third-party training available. Sit through. I don't think I've been in a job where I didn't have to sit through some sort of anti-harassment or data privacy protection training. But don't just do it as a manager. Make the whole team do it. So at least they're aware, right? They may come back and ask you about something later on, but make sure that everybody's getting trained on this stuff, because it happens at the front of the shop and it happens at the back of the shop. And
So, Gabriel, that was awesome. I know we have one question in about parts, and then I think I might have a question, but I would defer to George just because we have a couple minutes. But can I ask the attendee question first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so our attendee question is, are parts or material recycling back to manufacturing raw materials for reuse in manufacturing level rather than reusing as a used part developing? So I think what they're asking is, where are we getting with that?
Well, and just to tag on to it, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because when you got a fender that's the right shape, and now you're going to use energy to compress it, grind it up, redo it, restamp it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Gabriel.
Yeah, so I see it happen in both places. So both situations are happening. There's not recycled parts are not going to follow a single path. You really have to look at what the part is and what's the, I say, risk or liability about re-entering that back in, right? So George, you mentioned a fender. You start banging on a fender, shaping it, you're changing the malleability, all those tensile strength characteristics. Some of those may go back to be produced back into raw material and reused. other things like, I'm just going to throw out the steering gear from BMW. Right, George, we have that experience. Something like that, a component that might be dismantled, certain wearable pieces may be rebuilt and put back, and that's enough, right? It'll go through some testing and say, yep, it tests out right. And I think that's where you might see some regulations on, you know, company A has been vetted. They use the seals that match up to BMW's approval process. So their handling of it, their packaging of it, the tracking of the work that they've done or documentation, they can stand behind. So you may see company A be a source for that, whereas company B, who might be doing it as well, they just don't have that same oversight. So you might not see them as a source for that. So I think it's just going to depend on what the part is.
Well, since we're tight on time, Jordan, I'll let you ask your question and close it out. But I just wanted to tell you, Gabriel, thank you very much. And I got to tell you, this last side is gold. It's gold.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people at the start of it go, holy charisma, I got it. Oh, I don't even know where to start. And at least you gave them, these are a couple things to think about. I think that's awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah, Gabriel, I think just because of time, I won't ask my question, but I will say to the shops out there too, working with your vendor partners, just like AirPro as one of your partners in your business, like just knowing, like you said, where to come from with them, working with them, dialogue with them, how are they operating in their sustainability umbrella. And then I feel like shops should not be worried, freaked out, like, oh, here's the next hurdle. I think this is a huge opportunity for them. I think it speaks directly to the bottom line. I think you shared a lot of points about that this is actually a bucket of profitability that they really need to look into and dive into. So those were my thoughts. If you want to close with anything, Gabriel, we really appreciate you doing this today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jordan, I think you summed it up, right? This is a bucket of profitability that they can really look into. It's not as scary as regulatory as it may seem. And go back to my first slide. This is really just about doing good business, being efficient, staying on top of that efficiency side, and really doing good business. So thank you guys so much for the opportunity. If anything does come in, feel free to email me questions. I'm happy to always answer, support where I can. But thank you for the conversation and opportunity to talk today.
Thanks, Gabriel. So I'll just take a couple of seconds to talk about our next one, and then we'll close it out for you guys. So our next Tech Talk, Tech Talk 360 will be a panelist discussion about paint and radar. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be amazing. I think everybody's keen on this topic now, especially like we've said 100 times today, like on the CIC floor, this gets spicy. So I just want to make sure everybody marks their calendars for just after the next CIC will be November 15th. George and I and Fred will be back again. Gabriel, again, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for taking the effort to do this. Can't wait to see you guys in November.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.